When you want more privacy than Android offers, you buy an iPhone. But iOS still has a few blind spots that apps can exploit, and many of them do. So, what do you do in that case? You go back to Android. Well, not the Android, but an Android-based product. I mean Graphene OS. I started using it a few months ago, and it's got one feature I found so useful, I wish Apple just copied it. Because I still have quite a few Apple devices. In 2020, iOS received a new API that lets you grant limited access to your photo library. 4 years later, a similar API was introduced for contacts. And of course, apps from the companies we all know started abusing them almost immediately. For instance, Instagram reminds you about limited access to photos every time you want to share something. Okay, maybe that doesn't look too bad, so perhaps I wouldn't even call it abuse. WhatsApp is worse, because it shows giant banners on 3 tabs out of 5. Alright, perhaps that counts as 2 tabs, because I don't know anyone who uses this update section. For me, it only shows random stories and channels I didn't subscribe to. But my favorite example is Telegram. It just pretends that limited access doesn't exist. If you don't allow the app to see all of your contacts, you won't be able to search or invite them. It's my favorite example, because it just goes against App Store guidelines. In theory, it should get the app kicked off the store. I don't think I need to explain why sharing too much data with apps only benefits them, but not you. Especially so when the companies behind those apps have an abysmal track record on privacy or questionable security standards. What I can do instead is quickly explain how this becomes possible. It's all about those APIs I mentioned. If you've ever developed an app that uses contacts, photos, or cameras, you know that you have to ask the user before you can access them. The authorization APIs are very similar across frameworks like Contacts, Photos, or AV Foundation. The list of possible statuses obviously includes authorized and denied. They are self-explanatory. But it also has things like not determined and restricted. They're designed for when it's the first time requesting permission and for when the user can't grant it, because of parental controls for instance. But limited access for contacts and photos is reflected by a separate enum case. The authorization status is reported back to apps. And that is the precise mechanism they use to detect limited access and retaliate against you with those annoying banners. So, what do you do when apps don't respect user choice and instead harass them? You make the operating system lie to them. More specifically, you build an API layer that tricks apps into thinking that they have full access to contacts, photos, or files, when in reality they can only see the items you picked manually. That's exactly how it works in Graphene OS. And that is precisely the feature that's needed on Apple devices, especially for contacts. A single contact card can have so much more than a phone number. Birthday, email, home address, company name, and social media profiles are just a few examples of what the vCard standard supports. And if apps use manipulation to convince you to give them full access to contacts, do you think they faithfully limit themselves to the fields they strictly need? Don't kid yourself. And with photos, companies don't even pretend about their intentions. Facebook silently feeds your entire camera roll into its AI, allegedly to suggest some memories to share. Instagram does roughly the same. For now, you can opt out of this helpful feature, but I wouldn't be surprised if Meta started to push it just as aggressively as it demands full access to contacts in WhatsApp. And here's how it works in Graphene OS. In addition to the standard allow and don't allow options, you can enable contact scopes. This would let you pick individual contacts, or even just individual numbers in emails. But to the app, it would look as if you've given in to its nudging and provided full access. In the end, it's totally normal to have just one contact in your address book, right? Especially when it's got a number like this. The biggest difference from how it works in iOS is that the operating system doesn't tell apps that their access is limited in any way. And as a bonus, when you add individual phones and emails, apps can't see the extra fields like home addresses. With photos and files, it works in a similar manner. You can select limited access, and it would work the same way as on iOS. But instead, you can use storage scopes. This lets you add files and folders, as well as photos and videos from your library. And again, the app will have no idea it was restricted. Why iOS doesn't work like that, I don't know. The older of these APIs for photos was introduced in iOS 14. And you know what else arrived in iOS 14? That alert that Meta famously hates. It's called App Tracking Transparency. You would think that if Apple declared stricter rules for user privacy, it would consider all the possible ways developers could abuse the APIs. But that's not what happened. The problem is, Apple's track record on privacy is far less consistent than they want you to believe. It includes features like end-to-end encryption in iMessage and iCloud Drive. But it also includes things like the awkward downgrade of the Hide My Email feature. And I'm not even talking about situations when something actually goes wrong. You can just watch this video to get an idea of Apple's response. So no, what happens on your iPhone doesn't always stay on your iPhone. And often because of Apple's own oversight. Unless a feature makes money, it's out of focus. For instance, that app tracking transparency thing is widely believed to be a red herring. Apple used the privacy narrative as a decoy to monopolize user tracking and force advertisers to use its own ad network, instead of paying Google or Facebook. Nearly every user denies the request to track them. But what's more telling is that Apple's own advertising business tripled its market share in just 6 months after the launch of this tracking alert. Apple's already paid a couple $100 million in fines for being anti-competitive, but who's gonna be surprised at this point? That is to say, privacy can be a very convenient excuse. But when it doesn't result in immediate profits, it often becomes an afterthought. For instance, it couldn't have been easier to make the full and limited access modes look indistinguishable to apps. It only requires a single change in code to always report full access. This would have instantly made it impossible for apps to discriminate or harass their users. But at this point, the authorization APIs for contacts and photos give developers too much detail, and they happily abuse it while Apple's doing nothing. So, what can you do then? If you're a developer, you don't really need persistent access to the user's contacts or photos to get individual items in your app. The dedicated Picker APIs were introduced many years ago. To call them, you don't even have to request permission from the user. But if you're a developer who wants complete access to user data specifically to build a tracking or advertising network, just go f yourself, really. You're disgusting. I can find countless examples of dark patterns aimed at extracting as much data as possible, like these misleading claims about 100% security. Coming from a company whose business is selling ads, it sounds ridiculous. And if you're just a regular user, what I can suggest is to not approve every request you get from apps. When you let them upload all your contacts, you're leaking other people's data, not yours. I doubt every one of your friends would be happy to have their home address known to Meta or an even shadier company. And texting apps absolutely don't need this kind of info to send messages. That's it for today's episode on the Codebird. Subscribe to the channel for more content about software development. And if you found this one helpful, give it a thumbs up and consider sponsoring the Codebird on YouTube or elsewhere. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, make your apps fly.